In the end, his speeches had grown shorter, his appearances more rare. But Fidel Castro's tone remained defiant as ever.
Socialismo o muerte.
Socialism or death. Fidel Castro loved to hate America at every political turn.
Hasta la victoria siempre.
Eliancito, la patria te espera.
His own political stock, albeit small, soared during the international custody fight for Elian Gonzalez.
Bingo, bingo, bingo.
When the U.S. returned his little prince, Castro called the moment a moral victory over imperialist America. The man, born Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz in Biran, Cuba, came to power leading a ragtag band of bearded rebels to overthrow a dictator. He ended up becoming one himself. Castro stood defiantly against 10 U.S. presidents. Around the world, leftists who hated America's influence and power called Castro a hero. But for the U.S., he was the all-too-close face of the bitter Cold War. And while the world could never completely dismiss Castro politically, over time, to some critics, he seemed more like a caricature, with his wiry beard, faded fatigues, and 6-inch cigars. The man who would lead the small Caribbean island to communism was educated by Jesuit priests and earned his law degree at the University of Havana. Castro launched his first and failed revolution in 1953, where 30 of his followers were killed while attacking the Moncada barracks. Castro was imprisoned, then deported, but made his way back on an overloaded powerboat. After nearly a decade of coups, riots, and political rebellion, the people despaired of the government of Fulgencio Batista. He stepped down, left the country, and Castro seized power on January 1st, 1959. He held on for nearly 50 years. The most significant U.S. response to Castro's communist regime came in 1961, when President John F. Kennedy backed the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, where hundreds of Cuban exile fighters were captured and sent to prison or killed. The next year, American spy planes discovered secret Soviet missiles inside Cuba. After a 13-day U.S. naval blockade, the Soviet Union backed down and removed the missiles. Castro was enraged as the world watched two superpowers walk away from a nuclear nightmare. In 1980, Castro unleashed an unprecedented human wave of more than 125,000 Cubans on America. Mixed in with political prisoners were criminals, murderers, rapists, and the insane. The Mariel boat lift forever changed South Florida's landscape. 14 years later, as Cuba's economy collapsed further, Castro unleashed a second wave of human cargo. This time, whether America wanted them or not, 30,000 Cubans were coming to her shores again. In 1998, Cuba opened its island doors to Pope John Paul II. The Holy Father and the man who chained down Cuba's churches shared words before the world. Critics would later call the historic meeting little more than a public relations campaign. In the summer of 2006, Castro underwent surgery for intestinal bleeding and quietly ceded power to his younger brother, Raul. In February 2008, Castro announced he would no longer serve as Cuba's president and commander-in-chief. A surprising move few thought they would live to see. By the end of the month, the country's National Assembly formally elected Raul to succeed his brother Fidel. After resigning as the head of Cuba's Communist Party in April 2011, Castro remained largely out of the public eye. With one notable exception, in March of 2012, he would welcome a second pontiff, Pope Benedict XVI. The two met privately at the end of Benedict's 3-day visit to Cuba, despite the Pope's vocal opposition to Cuba's government. The two spoke for roughly 30 minutes, with Castro asking the Holy Father, "What does a pope do?" Still, Castro's conspicuous absence in later years fueled constant rumors about his health. When President Obama announced the softening of U.S. sanctions against Cuba in December 2014, President Raul Castro spoke with the American president by telephone, welcoming the announcement. But the man who brought communism to Cuba, Fidel, made no appearances and had no public comment on the ending of the Cold War freeze he'd ushered in more than a half-century earlier. Though often referred to as a tyrannical dictator, Millions on the impoverished island considered Castro the charismatic leader who brought education and medicine to the masses. But to America's Cuban exiles, he was forever hated, responsible for Cuba's economic ruin. In Washington, Brett Baer, Fox News.